The Spiral Stair, Book 1 of The Windows of the World, by Preston Pyle. Chapter 1. Eternal dangers of the void have come rapping once again against a window of the world. Only the brave can throw themselves through. Sometimes they are beckoned, sometimes they are pushed, but even when they are not willing, their passage binds the far reaches of space. Windows spread truth and lies faster than light. Armies will be raised, worlds destroyed, then built anew. The journey is only for the strong of mind, feel, and body. Come along, only if staying means more despair. Patience was in short supply for Atuma Harksgard as he shuffled through the dusky street. Sandborn sky and ominous heat. Nothing like the breezy summer evenings on the salty shores of the west. The local population, descendants to old Shahina, claimed anger was beaten into the land. For the last week, he had laid up inside the Garden Saloon Hotel in Harbor City, 40 miles north of the dig at Prihanda. Away from his team, pushed to the brink of his mental faculties, the young officer was only slightly closer to finding the answers he needed. Try as he may, he could not escape the harshness of the twilight sun. That was only partly the reason for his anger. The market was hardly bustling. Grocery shoppers littered the streets, while day laborers had long since left for the cafes. The locals were a mixture of cultures waved throughout the ages. Yellow flags flew outside most homes loyal to the Shmasanan culture, or the politically dominant trader class that had overtaken a more pastoral tradition. These traders dressed in yellow tunics and fine breeches. Yet there was no room for any other color than drab on the poor. Atuma did not know the name for them, but those people typically flew a band of leather strings across their windows. Or at least a few did. Skin color alone was not enough to name them, as everyone was a varying shade of tan. Conversations he overheard in the streets were filled with mutterings about the Blossage and their leader, Mantis Barge. But whenever Atuma grazed by, the talk would always hush. Despite his middling curiosity at the local culture, in the end it would not matter. Imperium was here now. They were creeping, and they would not stop. The land of Old Shahina, called today by several names depending on who you asked, was now firmly in the grasp of men like Atuma. A trade war which had lasted over a decade paved the way for those like him to usher in a better class of citizen. Modin's Imperium would not conquer the Shmasanans outright, but they would bleed. "Ticky-weed here," called a street vendor stationed awkwardly in the middle of a thoroughfare. Horses and carts were not common in this tight quarter of the old city. He wore a shabby robe with stained pantaloons. People started to clamor around him after he spoke the words, but not to his delight. "Pudpatra, you have it?" asked the young woman. Others called out the same. The vendor sighed deeply and shook them off. No, but I have a fair price on ticky-weed." Most of them, especially the young, groaned and moved on. Only a few remained, shuffling through their pockets for coin. He was not the only vendor without pudpatra. Mint smoke, as it was called by Imperium, was in short supply all over the region. The locals complained it began drying up when Imperium ships arrived at the docks for the dig. Atuma had meandered close to the group, but shuffled past quickly, not losing a step when they broke. Here was no good anyway. Too public. His dress did elicit stares, but most averted their gaze altogether. He felt no ill will to the people of Harbor City, or really any in the East for that matter. The poor fools had the disadvantage of being born on the wrong side of the world. He would not fault them for it, so long as they swam with the changing tide. It was his great hope they were to be his tides. They would know his name, some day. After he unearthed their great history, they would remember. Everyone would know warring Atuma Harksgard had made it happen. Where others failed, he and his team would not. The lost temple of Prihanda would be his. He just had to get past this unpleasantness. For having excelled at Navy Academy, top of his class, and prior to that more of the same at his district's college, Atuma was not comfortable here. His obsession with the absolutes of balancing an equation lent poorly to skills of negotiation and intrigue, further contrasted by the foreign culture. He approached what remained of the vendor stalls in the market center, bobbing and jerking his head across the displays of merchandise. A saw-faced vendor with frizzled gray and black hair had taken notice of him from the corner of her eye. "Not finding the selection to your liking, suit?" The Shmasanans held a fascination with the fine, deep-collared red silks worn by Imperium officers and cadets, so often the focus of pejoratives. They were unique in their swooping V-necks, which clasped on a gold latch directly above the sternum. It was light and billowy enough for its bearer to reach for their weapon inside from 4 different angles. "Your pardon?" Atuma cleared his throat. "It appeared everyone sells the same things." The old woman kept her eyes on her knitting, ignoring the slight towards her arrangement. "Oh, I wouldn't be too sure about that," laughing softly. "I want to know where to buy mint smoke." The grin beginning to appear on her face receded. The woman wrapped her yarn thrice and swiftly hooked her needle around the other. The sudden intensity drew Atuma closer. "You take this old woman for a street thug, boy? That what they empty your heads with on your side of the sea?" She spit to the earth. "3 sons I had, all wrapped up in the pudpatra one way or another. Your kind will never rule this land, Outlander, so long as the mint smoke does." Atuma wiped his brow, his jaws clenched. He did not have time for a lecture. He had found these Easterners to be proud, often ignorant, but he had played his hand and been caught out. It made no sense to chide her publicly and further sully Imperium. He pulled his hands from his side and clasped them over his ebony belt. "I applaud your morals." He offered a tepid bow and flipped her a coin. "Your boys will live on in my memory." The woman squinted at Atuma as if trying to study his face. Then, nodding absently, she went back to her knitting. The warg fancied a pivot and started moving down the row with less urgency but more intent. "I should have more care." While mint smoke's harmful effects were not an issue of debate in Imperium circles, the vice and the industry pushing it was more divisive in this part of the world. The young officer resolved to move on toward the heart of the old city. The city elderman, a rotund fellow named Covaner, had warned valiant Ubowdi of a recent string of murders in that part of town. Ubowdi taunted the notion later in an aside to Atuma. "Leave it to the blood of old Shahina. Imperium hands them favorable volume on great fish just to prick their own fingers." Thinking of his prosaic superior caused Atuma's blood to run hot. "I need this mint smoke." The roads had turned into alleyways, buildings began closing in around him, and every few steps were a tight cut to the left or right. While he passed few people, every one of their eyes felt eerie. He was out of place in a sea of drab woolen clothing. Atuma crossed his arms to protect his pockets from vagrants and slightly increased his pace. The walkway turned to a smaller avenue sprinkled with shops. The ones that were open either dealt in baubles or vices. A voice caught his ear, some yards back. "Ahoy, suit!" It was high-pitched, young, and eager. Atuma slowed but did not yet turn to acknowledge. If he did, he would be setting a precedent for all further interactions in the town. Not that he wanted any. He lifted his head in anticipation of the coming contact. "Blimey, wait up!" The words came from a wiry teenager who had now passed the officer and spun round. Swaying a bit, he caught himself. Brown, shaggy hair matted over his ears and forehead. The boy was not out of breath or flustered, but there was an intensity to his narrow face. "What is the meaning of this, boy?" Atuma straightened. The youth pulled his hips back, revealing a shimmer in his yellow tunic. This did not look like the cheap, bland clothing found on the rest of the quarter. "Not often a suit comes to the old city," said the teen, haphazardly bowing. "Rarer still, looking for a sweet release." From thin air he produced a thin brown packet and spun it between his fingers. The strings holding it in place were fine and silvery, catching what dim light remained of the day. Atuma's head jerked, but he quickly recoiled and resumed walking. Time to assess his skill. Let us say that is pudpatra you are carrying. I have no desire to be fleeced by a country fop. The boy paused, amused, and began to follow. Name is Alrin, friend. Alrin Orahim. Normally, I avoid your type. Seem to have a certain air about them, most Imperium. Made up their mind even before they know what they are minding. Used to see more coming through here before moving on to the fort. Not so much anymore. Atuma was far enough ahead of Alrin to hide his smirk. I have heard of this boy. What is the heir to the harbor throne doing trying to sell me on such a vice? Proof enough your people need better heads in charge. I leave the census-taking to the academics, he said, and pointed to the crossed snakes on Atuma's lapel, the marking of the Ursiad, knowledge masters. Leaves the business to the Baron. Then, forgetting the slight, he pressed the sail forward. Perhaps a sampling at my establishment would be in better order, Warren. Very well. The odd pairing made their way deeper through the narrow passages of Harbor City's oldest district. Atuma followed hot on Alrin's heels, bidding him forward. The streets were unnamed, but that did not stop Alrin in his squeaky voice from describing short histories of the feeblest landmarks. This is certainly a terrible idea. But Atuma could not stop himself. The first time he felt the smoke in his lungs, he nearly burst, yet the sweet taste upon exhaling marked the start of a soothing sensation he had never gotten from the completion of a capstone thesis, or the commencement of the Prahanda dig. Here we are, one of our many bases of operations. Times have seen us Orahim kicked around and bloodied, but we are still the finest purveyors of pudpatra this side of the Hadornis. Really, the only purveyors, if you come to think of it. Atuma gave him a mocking face, which Alrin swallowed up with his grin. The yellow-clad boy had a spring in his step as he climbed the short, receded stairs to the row-house's porch. The house was not anything special, considering he was a Shmasanan noble. It was 3 floors of whitewashed mortar and little ornamentation other than orange-stained wooden window frames. Indistinguishable in quality from other houses in the row, it was the least plain within sight. Alrin rapped the door 3 times, then a short pause, followed by 2 more. The door opened slightly. Alrin's frame moved with Atuma, blocking his view into the foyer, where little light, if any, made it through to the room. Alrin paused at the doorknob, glancing back. Your shock stick, of course. The request's timing felt odd to Atuma. Stepping closer to the boy, still standing at the slightly cracked door, he gazed him down intently. Atuma reached between the V-shaped fold of his breastcoat to the holster resting over his liver. Turning the clasp hook down, he began to pull the ovular pommel up from his waist and stopped. Step through, boy. With a shrug, Alrin pushed the door open and shimmied inside. Atuma paused to look down a narrow hallway lit by candles. The home's facade would have indicated a wider windowed room. This was not the case. Not sure how it's conducted on your side of the world, mate, but you do not bring weapons inside a Shmasanan's home. His tone had visibly shifted. But a base of operations? Not looking eager or hesitant, Atuma stepped through the door and fully removed the weapon from his bright red coat. Then he shoved the hilt into Alrin's chest. The young lord clutched the stick reflexively, then started back. Do not worry, boy. It knows my grip. We engineer our weapons with a certain civility, after all. Alrin turned and started down the hallway. By habit, he found a small table halfway down the dimly lit corridor and placed the weapon there. As Atuma reached back to close the door, it started on its own, slowly. How quickly I have sunk. At the door, Alrin's mood and posture seemed to lift. He was giddy. Come inside, Warren. What the corridor lacked in light, the main room made up for tenfold. The walls were vast. At the top, he found ornate sconces lit by electrofilaments in the style commonly found in modern prime. 3 great paintings of pastoral scenes at varying stages of daylight dominated the back wall. The colors danced off the Amurti oil set on canvases stretching to the floor. They had to be at least 8 feet in height. While too large for the room, their quality spoke to this clan as expert traders. A long table, simple but clean, ran the length of the paintings. At it, a small boy and girl sat, deeply occupied with their own drawings. Neither would ever be close to the caliber of the images above them. From the far entry, a short cherub of a woman hustled to greet them. She wore the cap of a fish maiden and the shirt of a cable car operator. This way, she clamored. Her eyes were to the ground, avoiding awkwardness before she was close enough for a proper shake. It was only when she met the eyes of Warren Harksgard she stiffened. Found him on the street? Atuma kept his face droll and did not return her outstretched hand. Alrin, slightly chiding her ironically, "Sister, this Warring of the Earth Syed is here to sample our wares as he conducts scientific inquiry. No doubt he is looking to find what practical medicinal benefits come from our highest quality pudpatra." "Oh, I see," the woman noted, now every bit reserved. "I believe we both can pardon ourselves for our rudeness. He did not know I am the lady of this and other manors. I am Eltis Orahim. We would be happy to answer all questions about our product suit." Atuma nodded briskly and murmured something along the lines of charmed. Then, following Eltis with Alrin not follow behind, he noticed their faces had similar traits. Piercing brown eyes and rough-looking hair and long spirals. Alrin had more expensive clothes and a cocky stride, but Eltis was more poised despite being more homely. Wordlessly, they passed the adjacent room. A proper foyer of sorts, save for a disorganized bunch of the same basic chairs found at the long table. A tight circular staircase cut into the floor close to the far wall, and Eltis began to lead them down. "This is highly unusual," noted Atuma, about halfway down the stair. "I have business at my hotel. Will this take long?" Alrin beamed down to the officer, jumping in before Eltis could even muster a response. "Nothing unusual about our cellars. Keeps the uncut leaves moist for maximized enjoyment. Do they hate the stuff that much across the salted sea? They don't even tell you how we store it?" Atuma realized it would be pointless to fight their enterprising rituals. These Shmasana nobles, if you could call them that, were not going to respect his agency. At the foot of the staircase, approximately 20 feet down, the air held a cool stillness. The dark chamber's walls were solid sandstone. A narrow corridor with different doors gave Atuma an unsettled feeling. "More crypt than cellar," he snorted. Farther down the passage curved, revealing a large metal door marking the end of their path. Golden lace on the polished blue granite inlaid the face of an ancient-looking king set against a starry mountain sky. Instead of a dial, in the middle sat a grooved helical ornament. The feature seemed familiar. Eltis approached gracefully, giving it 3/4 turn to the left, 5 to the right, then 2 left again. A loud click followed, and she pushed. A ridge began to form, superimposed in the door, as part of it recessed into itself. After pushing a step forward, Eltis crossed over the sill, and the inner door started to swing to the left. "After you, Warren," Alrin gestured. The storeroom was expansive and wondrous. Hundreds of rows of airtight crates sat in neat terraces along the floor. Above Atuma's head, thousands upon thousands of upturned bushels of the pudpatra were hanging for cure. The air held a sharp minty smell. Atuma was overtook by the scent and gasped. The dizzying sensation abated, though he was able to keep stride with the quick-moving woman in front of him. "It takes 200 farmers to keep a storeroom like this filled. You must be the first of the Imperium ever to gaze on one of them," Alrin explained. "One of them?" "Quite foolish to string me in here. How do you know I will not be back with legionnaires and smash this place to bits? Mint smoke is a rot on our civilization." "Because we know there are no legionnaires within 200 leagues of here." Alrin stopped and faced the suit seriously. "Come now, Warren. You are underestimating both our resolve and your hypocrisy. Your teeth are freshly yellowed, and hands smell from the taking of smoke. You mean us no harm, at least not today." Atuma's eyes widened, and Alrin patted him on the back. "But there is no need for the apprehension. Eltis and I are here to make a friend." On the perimeter of the storehouse, on the edge of the dimmed lights of the filaments, Atuma noticed guards strapped with bolters, shiny ones. His retinue of academies, did not even carry weapons that nice. Atuma was now feeling exposed and bereft of leverage he was beginning to know he never had. By the standards of his valiant superiors, he was now a drug-addled degenerate who was less than deserving of his recent promotion to Warung. Hunching his shoulders, he resolved to simply complete the transaction. Alrin detected his dejection and softened his posture. "Eltise, you think we should show him the Dermbia Breeze or the Ketterfield Preserve?" "Why not both, brother?" Her canned expression was hidden in the dark. "Excellent idea." And with a start, he worked his way past Atuma and Eltise to the fringes of the rows. "Oi, Koro!" the boy called out into the dark. "You there?" "Yes, Lord Alrin." Giving a shout to let the entire chamber know, he continued, "Ah, blessings! See that our new friend from the west has a fresh lounge chair prepared, and a cremolten pipe readied." "Yes, my lord." The expressionless guard, with dark eyes and wrinkled forehead, broke his attention and receded towards the far wall. Alrin ran his finger and thumb by his chin. "Let us see here. The Dermbria came in busheled with the last load from—" He craned his neck. Yes, and then bounded off down the row spans from Atuma. Eltise kept her pace along the main column. Atuma chose to follow her. "A part of him believes you actually want the trade," Eltise sighed. "You're the one in charge of our shipments getting blocked, huh?" Atuma looked back at her puzzled. "I see," and then she clicked her tongue. "I am not a proud woman, but I grease the cudgel. We'll start you with 4 crates, 2 each of the Dermbria and Ketterfield. You can take delivery of them as early as tomorrow night." The stocky woman, whose face sat in a quiet symmetry, raised an eyebrow in intriguing anticipation. Atuma was trying to find a way to hide his continued confusion. Something tells me she does not mean pudpatra. "Surely you do not think I intend to deal with Shaheen and criminals. Are you hinting at bribing me, woman?" Eltise cast her eyes to the floor, then sighed. "Oh, silly Warung. All that schooling, all those books in your head, and you really know nothing." Atuma now felt the stares of the guards on him. It seemed as if their hands gripped tighter to the handles of their weapons. "You come to this land and claim the right to move our earth for your own design. You smoke our leaves, then follow us into our holes in the ground, and then think you can refuse us? We know you have hit troubles at Brihanda. We also know the laborers are given meager rations. But what really sharpens my axe is how you have disallowed us the access I demand. You thugs, you do not know what you are doing." He raised his hand to slap the woman, but the guards were quicker and had all drawn their bolters and trained them at Atuma's head. The low hum of their charge filled the chamber. Atuma recoiled back and quickly threw up his other hand in surrender. "We know we have the warring Atuma Harksgard in our possession, the second in command at the dig at Prihanya. For the last week, he locked himself away in a room at the garden saloon, studying furiously to correct his mistakes." She motioned Atuma to continue down the column. "And tomorrow, he begins to right his wrongs." Atuma grimaced. "I doubt very much you need pudpatra in the camp. Every night the tent rows roll thick in smoke. No, you have worse designs. I cannot allow it." Alrin, who had rejoined Eltise, did not say a word as he held 2 boxes, each the size of a mug. She wore a look of annoyance as she beckoned a younger guard with a narrow nose to open a nearby door. It led into an ovular library where the smell of mint smoke hung on the air. In the middle of the room sat a long reclining chair, and next to it a small table adorned by an ornate pipe. Eltise's eyes directed him to the room where she stopped at the doorway. Alrin followed Atuma in and briskly descended a short flight of stairs. He moved with grace to place the boxes on the table. Then he gave Atuma an empty shrug and exited. "We will give you some time to think it over, Warring," Eltise said blankly, acknowledging the setting. "We have enough people at Prihanja we can touch you any time. We want our next shipment to make it through the Twilight Gate. Also, do the right thing and send some relics back with you on the way out." "You're crazy." Atuma could not believe what he was hearing. "No, what's crazy is a young officer with a bright future had to meet his sorry end, all to the shame of his nation. There's no way you would get away with it. The mint smoke odor in your room, the eyewitnesses' accounts of a red seeking a fix in the square. There are endless spies to get word back to Maud and Prime. We do not even have to kill you," she smiled. "But we would, eventually." Atuma retreated, mind racing. If I do what you ask, how do I know you will still not kill me? Eltis gave out a subtle laugh. Oh, Warren Harksgard, you stopped knowing that the moment you stepped on a boat in whatever ghastly province the Reds plucked you up from. She turned for the exit. A woman, Karilla, she will come to you, and I would give her your blessing. I know Karilla. Eltis disappeared behind the door, and the lock clicked shut. It was hard to remember a time where he had felt more dread. The dig was stressful, yes, but this was something else. He was always at risk of being recalled under the passive eye of Balanu Bowdy, but the bureaucrat's ire could not compare to 8 bolters trained on him at once. This must have been just a taste of the East's bloody brand of politics. Atuma collapsed into the chair's rich red fabric. It was extremely comfortable and seemed to contour to his shape. The armrests fit his wingspan perfectly, and so did the footrest. Instinctively, he reached for the table, but caught himself. No, that is what they want me to do. He would not slink closer to their grasp. These Shmasanans thought him weaker than he was. Karilla is not the only one of their agents active at the dig. No doubt that outlander, Padral Kelmo, snuck the mint smoke into my pack. The mint smoke is less important than the access it provides. The situation sickened him. If he complied, he would be turning over treasures and control of the dig to these criminals. They would then use that power as a rallying cry, which threatened Imperium influence in the region. If he did not comply, they could kill him, or worse yet, expose his new vice. All his work, all his achievements would be lost. He was not sure if the punishment would be imprisonment, as few stories existed about Imperium officers who had brought disgrace to the name. Sure, there was cases where it was assumed someone's disappearance or reassignment was due to some implication, but it was only that. Assumption. Atuma blew a tuft of air up towards his face, realizing nothing was to come from worry. He would have to find a way forward and subvert this new complication. How can I keep Ubowdi from knowing? That was the key. Everything else did not matter. He could coax or scare any of the academies. They were not the issue. But something Eltis said about being able to touch him led him to believe another Red was indebted to the Orahim. Who were these people, really? The Warren gave his head a turn and scanned the books lining the room's rotund walls. He may as well read to pass the confinement. He ran his fingers along a section of brightly colored spines that suggested family lineages. Then there were blackened tomes that gave off the feeling of mathematical proofs. A title sticking slightly out from a range of political histories caught Atuma's eye. He reached to inspect it. The Making of the Spiral Stair, Andrulius I, 110 to 147. The title intrigued him, as he knew during the 2nd century, after the fall of the unremarkable New Shahinan Empire, the East was carved into unruly bandit fiefdoms. He had never heard of an Emperor Andrulius. Regnal numbers had not been used here for thousands of years. Carefully, he opened the book and thumbed its contents. There were chapters called March on Emirth. Then there was the Marlowan Pact, but one caught his eye, Coronation at Old Prihunja. The book detailed the life and career of a northern shepherd who united warring tribes under a single yellow banner. Impossible. The mongrels who ruled here before the Blasage and Smeshanan were ruthless, to the point it cost them their own survival. Yet, according to the history, the shepherd Andrulius brought a peasant revolt against a feudal despot in the land of Emirth. Andrulius predicted where the Emirti lord would march to meet him and used that route to launch attacks on their flanks. The northern valleys proved a killing ground for the lord and his beleaguered army. But the cinch in the shepherd's plan was his second front. Before the lord's retreat to the Emirti capital, Andrulius had his female followers gradually smuggle themselves into the city. Somehow, when the pursuing peasant army laid siege to the citadel, most of the rations had mysteriously spoiled. And when nothing remained but wine, the lord called a lottery to decide the order of distributing remaining resources. On the night before the lottery, when the soldiers were drunk on their own misery, the women were signaled from outside. As Andrulius led a brute force charge up the walls, the women crept in the shadows of the battlements. When all attention fell to the breach, the women began stabbing and cutting down their lord's men from behind. The siege had ended, and a legend was born. Those loyal to the Immorti Lord retreated to the keep, while the outer gates were opened. And Julius parleyed only with the soldiers, refusing to do business with the Lord. He asked they choose one from their ranks to execute the Lord, and only the Lord. The soldiers would then be pardoned, provided they gave oaths to Andrulius. After intense argument, the captains of the household guard turned on his lord by running him through with a dagger. He then opened the keep to the shepherd. After all the men had knelt, Andrulius brought the captain forward. "You have done well, captain, in securing a bright future for your men. But I cannot have anyone who betrays their oaths in my army." Andrulius ordered him to kneel, then lopped off his head with a broadsword. Andrulius won himself Immorth in 139, after which his brand of popular justice soon swept the continent. He secured allies at the crossroads of Marloa and did well to reform what could be reformed in those primitive days of cultivation. After 3 years of successful campaigns across all of Old Shahina, he married the daughter of a southern lord and sired an heir. After Marloa, he was ready for his most ambitious plan yet, a trip to the Valley of Kings, Prihanja, or today known as Prihanda. There he was crowned before an enclave befitting the man able to bring about the next coming of Shahina. The story was so fantastical to Atuma, but oddly specific to be fiction. He thought back to his own findings on the trench and the still immense task before him. Of the coronation proper, the history read, "Lords and ladies from the furthest reaches of Old Shahina, broken and within throngs of poor, were pulled up to the city, and there to witness him. The son of sons of shepherds, down the avenue to the crown. Were the names known or forgot, it mattered not then, as his army were to bring a new age to the land. But it mattered the priest would meet him, outside and not within, saying, 'Comes now Andrulius, and we know he is to take us from the dark to descend the spiral stair. Comes now the shepherd, to bring the age of the spiral stale. Comes now our day of waiting.'" The text went on to describe Andrulius entering the temple alone, where he remained for weeks and nights, praying and planning with the priests. After the coronation, the history turned towards a critique of his legacy on the heels of a sudden retreat from public life. His last notable accomplishment was the commissioning of fortifications around an inlet that would someday become Harbor City. 4 years later, he died quietly, leaving his regent to fight his sickly child over the dominion. The boy killed or lost caused another hairy chapter to close on this ancient land. This would have been helpful months ago. Atuma smoothed over his forehead with a fist. His eyes hurt reading a great deal of the history so quickly. He sat the book on the table, satiating his mind enough with the discovery to resist another urge for the smoke before closing his eyes. They must let me out soon, no? And he drifted to sleep. The hour was late or may have been early when Atuma woke in a panic. He prayed he was in his room at the garden saloon, and this entire business with the Orahim was a dream. But he was not there. He was back in the library, although the door was now open. Also beside him, replacing the pipe on the table, were dreary Shmasanan clothes. Unclipping his serpentine lapel, he hastily changed, casting his red military suit on the chair. Without a second thought, he ran to the door and crossed the storeroom. He gave the vault door a 3/4 turn to the right, 5 turns to the left, and 2 to the right, like Eltis had done. Curving through the passage, up the stairs, through the foyer, his shock stick was waiting for him in the hallway. He felt relieved stepping into the pre-dawn air and hurried on to his hotel. "Can we trust him, seeing as he did not take the smoke?" Alrin asked his sister, peering from the upstairs window. "We can trust he'll be better at his job," his sister answered. She was deftly thumbing a history book between her hands. "Now get ready. You have a busy day ahead of you."